January 14, 1942, Santa Isabel Harbor. Fernando Po. The Italian officers felt perfectly safe. 12 of them sat at a casino table overlooking the harbor, watching the sun dissolve into the West African coast. Wine flowed freely. German officers joined them, their uniforms crisp despite the tropical heat. Below, 3 Axis ships sat at anchor, protected by Spanish colonial authority, 6-inch coastal defense guns, and the unbreakable shield of international law. They believed themselves untouchable in neutral waters. They were about to discover just how catastrophically wrong they were. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story, if you're enjoying this tale of audacity and military brilliance, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from, whether you're in London, Lagos, or somewhere in between. Your support helps keep these stories alive. The Italians raised their glasses. The Germans laughed at some joke lost to history. Through the windows behind them, if anyone had bothered to look, they might have seen dark shapes moving across the water. But no one looked. The room was warm, the wine was excellent, and in that moment, sitting with their backs to the harbor, they had no idea that 32 British commandos were already aboard their ships, planting explosives on the anchor chains, preparing to commit what would be called the most audacious act of piracy in modern naval warfare. Fernando Po sat just 30 kilometers off the West African coast. The Spanish colonial island provided the perfect vantage point to monitor Allied convoys sailing from South America and South Africa to Britain. For 18 months, the Italian cargo liner Duquesta d'Aosta had done exactly that. 8,500 tons of ship equipped with a working radio transmitter reporting every Allied naval movement to Axis forces. Beside her, 2 German vessels, the ocean-going tug Lacumba and the barge Burundi, formed what British intelligence believed was a covert U-boat supply network. The strategic mathematics were simple and terrifying. In January 1942, German U-boats were destroying merchant shipping faster than Britain could replace it. Every convoy lost meant less food, less fuel, less hope. The island nation was fighting for survival, and 3 Axis ships sitting in a neutral harbor. Monitoring convoys and supporting submarines represented an unacceptable threat. Winston Churchill looked at the maps, looked at the intelligence reports, and made a decision. International law be damned. Spanish neutrality be damned. Those ships were too dangerous to leave alone. The Admiralty approved military action on November 20, 1941. Immediately, opposition erupted from every quarter. General Sir George Giffard, commanding West Africa Command, refused support. He called the plan piracy with severe repercussions. The Foreign Office opposed it. The British Embassy in Madrid warned of diplomatic disaster. Spain might join the Axis. The Straits of Gibraltar could close. Mediterranean supply lines could be cut. The operation was suspended. But Churchill kept pushing. On January 6, 1942, the Foreign Office granted final approval with one critical condition: no tangible proof of British involvement. The operation could proceed only if plausible deniability could be maintained. But if it could be done in darkness, with no witnesses, with a perfect cover story, then perhaps Britain could steal 3 ships from under Spanish guns and walk away clean. The mission fell to a unit that would write itself into Special Forces history and pay for its audacity with nearly every principal leader's life. The small-scale raiding force, also known as Number 62, Commando specialized in what Churchill called ungentlemanly warfare. Major Gus March Phillips commanded the force, 33 years old, a Royal Artillery officer who had evacuated from Dunkirk. He founded the unit in early 1941. He personally sailed their vessel, a 65-ton Brixham trawler called Maid Honor, from Poole to West Africa. He arrived in Freetown, Sierra Leone on September 20, 1941. 4 months later, he would lead the raid on Fernando Po. 8 months after that, he would be dead on a beach in occupied France. Captain Geoffrey Appleyard served as second in command. 25 years old, born in Yorkshire, he had graduated first in engineering from Cambridge. He met March Phillips at Dunkirk and joined the commandos in late 1940. He already held the Military Cross before Operation Postmaster. Within 18 months, his aircraft would disappear over the Mediterranean. He was 20-6. Captain Graham Hayes, commanded the second raiding party. 27 years old, a Yorkshire man with seafaring experience, he would receive the Military Cross for the Fernando Po raid. The Germans would execute him by firing squad in July 1943. He was the most remarkable member was Anders Lassen, 21 years old, a Danish sailor who joined British commandos after Germany invaded Denmark. Quiet, intense, utterly fearless. During the Fernando Po raid, he would be first aboard the Italian ship. The man known as the Terrible Viking would become the only non-Commonwealth recipient of the Victoria Cross in the Second World War. He died in April 1945, 3 weeks before Germany surrendered. He was The raiding force numbered exactly 32 men. For Special Operations executive agents, provided intelligence. 11 commandos formed the assault teams. 17 local recruits from Nigeria would crew the 2 tugs. They had trained for months, navigation, survival skills, silent killing, hand-to-hand combat, amphibious assault, explosives, boarding ships at sea. While the commandos trained in England, so agents infiltrated Fernando Po. Leonard Geiss began surveillance visits in August 1941. He observed the ships, studied the harbor, noted patrol patterns. What the British really needed was someone inside. Richard Lippett executed the more audacious infiltration. He obtained employment with John Holt Company, a Liverpool shipping firm operating on Fernando Po. Legitimate businessman, respectable cover. Over months, he cultivated relationships with the Italian and German crews. He gathered intelligence on crew numbers, watch arrangements, the ship's readiness for sea. On January 6, 1942, the very day the Foreign Office granted final approval, Lippett attended a party aboard Duquesa d'Aosta itself. He stood on the deck of the ship Britain planned to steal 8 days later, drinking wine with the officers who would lose her. But the most remarkable intelligence operation involved the pro-German Spanish governor and creative blackmail. So agents filmed the governor in compromising circumstances with his mistress. Then they leveraged the footage to obtain aerial reconnaissance flights disguised as sightseeing trips. Spanish colonial authorities unwittingly provided detailed surveillance photographs of their own harbor. The governor, terrified of exposure, cooperated completely. The intelligence revealed the operation's critical timing. The town generator shut down every night at precisely 2,330 hours. For those minutes before backup lighting engaged, the harbor plunged into complete darkness. The British would strike during the darkest night of the lunar period, synchronized with the power cut. 30 minutes of darkness. 30 minutes to steal 3 ships. On January 11, 1942, 2 tugboats departed Lagos carrying the raiding force. Vulcan and Nonatan were civilian vessels borrowed from Sir Bernard Burdillon, governor of Nigeria. For 3 days, the commandos practiced lowering full-boat canoes and boarding ships at sea. Every man knew his role. Every second had been planned. As the tugs approached Fernando Po, Richard Lippett executed the operation's most elegant deception. He arranged a dinner party at the Santa Isabel Casino for the evening of January 14th. He invited 12 Italian officers from Duquesa d'Aosta and 2 German officers from Lacumba. The casino overlooked the harbor. Lippett seated the officers strategically, their backs to the windows, free-flowing alcohol, good food, conversation, and laughter. The officers would sit 50 meters from their ships and watch them disappear while enjoying British hospitality. They would never know who had paid for the wine. At 2,315 hours on January 14th, Vulcan positioned itself 180 meters outside Santa Isabel Harbor entrance. The commandos checked their weapons one final time: grappling hooks, scaling ladders, explosive charges. At 2,330 hours, the generator shut down on schedule. The harbor lights died. The town plunged into darkness. The 2 tugs entered silently. Vulcan carried March Phillips Appealyard and Lassen with the main boarding party. The tug approached Duquesa d'Aosta directly. A few crew members shone a torch at the approaching vessel, but they took no defensive action. They assumed it was routine harbor craft. The massive Italian liner sat peaceful and unsuspecting in the darkness. 11 men boarded using grappling hooks and scaling ladders. No opposition. The crew, leaderless with all officers ashore, offered minimal resistance. Most were below decks, some were sleeping. Lassen went first up the ladder, moving with silent efficiency. One team planted explosive charges on the massive anchor chains. Another team swept below decks, collecting bewildered prisoners. the Italians surrendered without struggle. What could they do? Their officers were at a casino. Their ship was surrounded. Simultaneously, Nuneaton approached the two German vessels moored together. Captain Hayes led his team in full-bot canoes, paddled silently through dark water. When a watchman on Burundi challenged them, the commandos claimed to be the ship's captain returning aboard. The watchman, confused in darkness, allowed them to approach. The moment the commandos reached the deck, the two-man watch crew jumped overboard rather than resist. They simply abandoned their posts and swam for shore. Hayes' team moved quickly, plant explosive charges, secure the vessels, guide Nuneaton alongside. Within minutes, both ships were under British control. The prisoners secured, the charges set. Everything proceeding exactly as planned. At the casino, Italian and German officers enjoyed their third hour of dinner. The wine flowed freely. Lippet kept the conversation going. Through the windows behind them, dark shapes moved in the harbor below. But the officers faced away from the windows. The room was warm, the wine was good. Why would anyone look outside? At the predetermined moment, explosive charges detonated simultaneously across all three ships. The thunderous blasts echoed across Santa Isabel, the massive anchor chains severed cleanly. The ships were free. The town's anti-aircraft emplacements immediately opened fire, but at imagined aerial targets, Spanish gunners believed the explosions indicated an air raid. They fired wildly into the empty sky. The harbor's 6-inch coastal defense guns remained silent. Their crews, confused, hesitated. By the time anyone understood the situation, it was too late. Vulcan strained under the weight of the 8th. The massive Italian liner began moving toward the harbor mouth, slowly at first, then gaining momentum. Nuneaton towed both German vessels together. The commandos established watch routines, guards posted over prisoners, 29 captured. Navigation teams plotted courses for open water. Spanish colonial forces gathered on the pier. They watched in bewilderment as 3 large ships, suddenly free of their moorings, began moving. Shouts echoed, orders screamed. But no one fired on the departing vessels. The Spanish coastal defense guns could have sunk all 3 ships easily. But who was the enemy? The explosions suggested aerial attack. The departing vessels suggested theft. In the confusion and darkness, Spanish forces held their fire. From harbor entry to departure, with 3 captured ships under tow. Exactly 30 minutes. Not a single shot fired by the raiding force. 0 British casualties. 3 Axis vessels in British hands. The most audacious cutting-out operation since the age of sail. At the casino, the explosions and anti-aircraft fire finally drew attention. Officers rushed to the windows. They saw fire in the harbor. Several ran outside. By the time they reached the harbor, their ships had vanished into darkness. Empty moorings, broken anchor chains. Nothing else. The German captain, drunk and furious, stormed to the British consulate, screaming for his ship back. When the consul claimed ignorance, the German captain started a fistfight in the lobby. He was restrained and dragged away. Most of the remaining Germans and Italians were too intoxicated to make sense of the situation. They stood on the pier, staring at empty water. Spanish locals laughed openly. African dockworkers grinned. The mighty Axis powers had lost 3 ships without firing a shot in return. Richard Lippet quietly settled the casino bill and disappeared. Into the night, the extraction phase tested the raiders' seamanship. Both tugs experienced engine trouble, straining under enormous weight. But the operation's most critical element remained the staged capture that would provide legal cover. On January 16th, Vulcan reached predetermined coordinates in international waters. HMS Violet, a Flower-class corvette, had been dispatched specifically for this moment. The corvette executed a carefully choreographed interception. British naval vessel discovers Italian ship drifting at sea, 230 miles offshore, international waters. Perfectly legal capture. The corvette escorted Vulcan into Lagos with triumphant entrance, as if the ship had been found abandoned. The cover story machinery engaged immediately. Ian Fleming, serving as Naval Intelligence Liaison to SO, had crafted press releases before the operation launched. The British Admiralty issued a communiqué: no British or Allied ships were in the vicinity of Fernando Po. Then, after German and Spanish allegations, the Admiralty claimed reconnaissance patrols had discovered a large, unidentified vessel. British naval forces were investigating this mysterious ship found drifting in international waters. Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden repeated the denials with perfect diplomatic sincerity. Even Britain's own military leadership was deceived. Spanish Foreign Minister Ramon Serrano sooner exploded with rage. Franco's brother-in-law issued a statement, "An intolerable attack on our sovereignty. No Spaniard can fail to be roused by this act of piracy." Spain threatened war. German radio claimed a British destroyer had entered the harbor and murdered crews. Germany and Italy demanded Spain take military action. Diplomatic protests flooded London. But Spain took no military action. No break in diplomatic relations occurred. The threats proved empty. Spain, economically devastated from civil war and dependent on Allied trade, could not risk confrontation with Britain. The fury was genuine. The humiliation was real. But the threats were hollow. Churchill had calculated correctly. The raiders received recognition. Major March Phillips was awarded the Distinguished Service Order. Captain Hayes received the Military Cross. Captain Appleyard received a bar to his existing Military Cross. Lassen received an immediate battlefield commission and the Military Cross. But the price came due within 18 months. On September 12, 1942, Operation Aquident killed March Phillips. Hayes was betrayed by a French double agent. After 9 months of solitary confinement, he faced a German firing squad on July 13, 1943. The same day, Appleyard's aircraft disappeared over the Mediterranean. Lassen survived to join the Special Air Service. He was killed on April 9, 1945, during operations at Lake Comacchio, Italy, days before Germany surrendered. He received the Victoria Cross posthumously, the only non-Commonwealth recipient in the Second World War and the only SAS member ever awarded the decoration. King George VI, greeting Appleyard at his third investiture in 11 months, had remarked, "What, you again?" The young commando who helped steal 3 ships from a Spanish harbor died at 26. He never enjoyed peacetime after his remarkable achievements. March Phillips died at 34, Hayes at 28, Lassen at 24. The men who proved ungentlemanly warfare could work paid the ultimate price. The small-scale raiding force disbanded in April 1943. Many members transferred to Algeria to form the nucleus of the 2nd Special Air Service Regiment. The unit is considered a direct precursor to the modern SAS. Its operational methods influenced Special Forces doctrine for decades. The combination of long-term intelligence, preparation, elaborate deception, minimal force, and political cover remains the template for sensitive operations in contested territory. Operation Postmaster proved the concept 80 years before contemporary special operations forces routinely execute similar missions. Ian Fleming witnessed it all. As naval intelligence liaison, he crafted the cover stories and managed the political warfare. He knew March Phillips personally. He worked closely with Appleyard. He witnessed Lassen's extraordinary courage. The commandos operated under W prefix agent codes. March Phillips was W01. Appleyard was W02. The W designated license to kill in SOE terminology. Historians argue convincingly that Operation Postmaster directly inspired the James Bond character. The combination of sophisticated intelligence operations, audacious military action, elaborate deceptions, beautiful agents, political intrigue, and gentlemanly ruthlessness appeared throughout Fleming's novels. Bond's 007 designation, licensed to kill, echoes the W prefix codes. The Caribbean and colonial settings recalled West African operations. The blend of resourcefulness, courage, and moral ambiguity found literary expression in Commander James Bond. On Fernando Po, the harbor returned to routine after the raid. The broken anchor chains were recovered from the harbor floor. Spanish authorities wrote angry reports to Madrid. German and Italian officials filed protests. Local residents told stories about the night the British stole 3 ships. In London, Churchill received reports on the operation's success with satisfaction. He had pushed for approval despite opposition from every quarter. He had calculated that Spanish threats were hollow, that plausible deniability would prevent definitive proof, and that strategic necessity justified the risk. He was right on all counts. The gamble paid off completely. The validation of special operations, the demonstration of British reach, the message to neutral governments, all achieved through the audacity of 32 men and 30 minutes of action. The Axis powers learned an uncomfortable lesson. Neutral waters provided no protection from British determination. Spanish coastal guns and international law meant nothing. The era of gentlemanly warfare was over. Churchill's vision of ungentlemanly warfare, special operations achieving strategic results through audacity, deception, and minimal force, had proven itself. 12 Italian officers and 2 German officers stumbled back to Santa Isabel Harbor that night to find empty moorings. The laughter of locals rang in their ears. The wine they had enjoyed was paid for by British intelligence. The dinner party was a deception. The ships were gone. The humiliation was complete. 3 ships stolen from under coastal defense guns. International law violated with perfect plausible deniability. Strategic objectives achieved without firing a shot. The British had done what everyone said was impossible, and they did it in exactly 30 minutes.